All right, we're going to cut to the chase. We're going to get to the heart of the matter. We're going to go to where the rubber meets the road. We're even get down to brass tacks. And that is, we're going to show what you're actually buying when you're getting either a heat pump or a furnace. And that is delivered BTUs. Okay, so we'll look at the cost of delivered BTU for a natural gas furnace, for a home heating oil furnace, and for a heat pump. And those are going to go into the mix and help you make hopefully a final decision as to which is best for you. That's our goal at any rate. So fire, traditional on the right, on my right anyway, campfire, been burning these things for thousands of years since cave people times. Pretty effective, right? But heat pumps are a magical way to create heat, relatively new way. You see this alarming sight of a truck on fire, but a better analogy would be like a Costco gas tanker getting 4 or 5 miles the gallon, but it's delivering 10,000 gallons to the Costco gas station. And so it's transferring, even though it's only getting 4 or 5 miles a gallon, it's pretty efficient in that it is transferring all these BTUs for a relatively small number of BTUs. And that's how a heat pump works. The compressor and the fan motors transfer heat from outside your house to inside your house. And yes, there is still heat to be had, even when it's 25 degrees, say, outside. You're transferring that from outside inside. And that's the magic of how heat pumps can be, in most cases, more than 100% efficient. We'll get to the cases where they're not here momentarily. First example we're looking at is this natural gas furnace. It's using 7.5 MCF for this particular month. And it took $85.49 to purchase those 7.5 thousand cubic feet. MCF is thousands of cubic feet of natural gas. Notice how there's $18.99 down at the bottom. We're not including that. That was for insurance for this unit. That's not relevant to our analysis, so keep that out of any utility bills that you have, but do put in any taxes on delivered kilowatt hours or on MCF or whatever, because those are very relevant to what you're paying per BTU. So we're going to be doing some conversion here. MCF, we first need to get into normal cubic feet, and from normal cubic feet to BTUs, and things cancel in this conversion process. Thank you, Mr. Hopwood, 10th grade chemistry, for showing me and the other students how to convert units and cancel things. It's pretty effective in this analysis for all three of these. You go through this, you have an infinitesimally small number for your dollars per BTU. So we are taking that number and multiplying it by 10,000 to come up with 7.6 cents per BTU. So that's 7.6 cents for purchase BTU, but we still need to figure out what the delivered BTU is, because what we're buying there isn't what's delivered to the space, and that's because this furnace, 50-year-old furnace, is around 65% from what I could garner from my internet search efficient. So you divide that cost by 0.65, you end up getting around 12 cents per 10,000 delivered BTU. So keep that number in mind. And when I was growing up, we were taught we're running out of natural gas, we're running out of gasoline, oil, and we were at the time, but we've discovered so much more of it that there's now thought to be over 19,000 years worth of natural gas just in the United States. And some of us may be dead in 19,000 years, but probably what's going to happen before then is there are going to be better ways to do heating, and we're going to look at some of those here momentarily as well. And heat pump potentially could be one of those ways. And don't feel bad if you have a natural gas furnace though, because it is pretty relatively clean. Our utility grid still gets 38% of its power for the grid from natural gas and combustion, and the utilities also still use a bit of coal. They also use a lot of renewable solar and wind farm energy as well. But anyway, environmental aspects aside, there's plenty of natural gas, and because of that, our cost of natural gas actually has come down since 2008. Very unstable though, so if it's particularly cold winter, that could drive up the price. If we're in a new different war, that could drive up the price, et cetera, et cetera. I like the colloquial look to this home heating oil bill. It's handwritten, it has the old stamp at the top of how many gallons were purchased. In this case, 38 some gallons were purchased at $4.96 a gallon. So at $4.96, there are 130,000 BTUs per gallon around for home heating oil. So that gives us, once we multiply by the 10,000, 38 cents cost to purchase that home heating oil. And in this case, this furnace was actually pretty new, still had the Energy Guide sticker on it, shows 83% efficiency. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to divide that by 83, and we come up with 46 cents per 10,000 BTUs delivered. Okay, so far we looked at two. We looked at natural gas at 12 cents per 10,000 BTUs and home heating oil at 46 cents. And if you are using home heating oil furnace, you know why you're using it. And that is because you can't get natural gas, or the natural gas company says, sure, we'll come out there right away. Just give us $10,000 and we'll bring the line underneath the road to your house and you'll be ready to go. And we'll see here that you'll have the math to figure out if that's a good decision compared to sticking with your home heating oil furnace, but probably you're going to want to do the heat pump versus the natural gas. So similar, home heating oil fluctuates up and down, but we're, to the best of my knowledge, not running out of that either. Electricity sample, you buy electricity in kilowatt hours, so that's yet again a little bit different. So in this bill, there was $7.70 of base charge for having the right to have these kilowatt hours delivered via the grid. So we're going to subtract that out and then divide the remainder by the 182 kilowatt hours to come up with $16.1 cents per kilowatt hour. And there are 3,412 BTUs in 1 kilowatt. And so if you do the math on here and multiply out by 10,000, you come up with 47 cents per purchased 10,000 BTUs. And remember, we haven't done the analysis on this one yet to look at efficiency, and in this case, the efficiency is going to play in our favor. But before going to the next page, you'll see below the yellow there's a link if you want to learn what the electric rate is for your state. That's quite a link to try and type out. I realize you can't click on it, but if not, just search for eia.gov/electricity and they'll give you plenty of information and interesting factoids before you make it to your end destination that I think you'll enjoy as well. So adjusting this one for efficiency, heat pumps are measured in something called HSPF. The HSPF of this one was 8.2 BTUs per watt, but down toward the left of the yellow tag there, you can see that if you look at it instead of BTUs in versus BTUs out, there are 2.4 BTUs out for every BTU in. So that means that it's 240% efficient, which is wonderful. So of that 47 cents per BTU, we're actually in the end only going to be paying 19.6 cents, or around 20 cents for 10,000 BTUs of what we're delivering to the space. Okay, so if you might remember the natural gas is still ahead at this point, right? Because natural gas was 12 cents per kilowatt hour. This is 20 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm sorry, 12 cents for 10,000 BTUs. This is 20 cents per 10,000 BTUs. But that's not the whole story, because heat pumps, they actually, between say like 30 degrees and 65 degrees, very efficient, more efficient than 240% potentially. All right, so the closer you are to 65 degrees is kind of a number that you, from analysis standpoint, it's considered you don't probably need much heating at that point, because you're in the house, people are in the house, lights are in the house, sun is coming through the window, etc., and you probably don't need much air conditioning at that point. So, but if you look at from 30 degrees to 65 degrees, heat pumps are more than, for a good chunk of that range, more than, this one would be more than 240% efficient in that range. So that might clue you off to something, that there may be times, even if you have a furnace in place, you might want to get in on some of this heat pump action for your shoulder months if you're in a colder area, northern area, or you just might want to run off heat pumps if you're not spending a lot of days that are much below 30 degrees. And this chart, from the first look at it, like, oh, this is a nice steady chart. Well, it's steady up, and that's what makes it super ugly, because in 2022, the average cost, and for average based on each state in the country, was 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour. Now it's over 16 cents per kilowatt hour, and that is based on states. So there's states like Tennessee or other states. I mean, Tennessee has a good sized population, but Wyoming, other states that have smaller costs per kilowatt hour, but also smaller price, are averaged into the 16 cents. But if you only look at if you look instead at where most people are living, either on the east or west coast, the cost there is over 23 cents per kilowatt hour. So the average household is paying more than 23 cents per kilowatt hour as of right now. And because of some factors of renewables are now being required, utilities are their hands are tied in that they're having to purchase renewables from individuals. They're having to take in more wind energy, and all this energy is variable energy. It's not constant, like putting coal into the burner, and you can very easily regulate how much power you're getting out based on that type of plant. But when you have solar plants, or you have some of these other variable green sources that are becoming on the grid, it's a tough business managing the grid right now. I'd say hats off to them. They keep raising the prices, and so for individuals here, that's one of the challenges of a heat pump, is the cost of electricity keeps going up, but we will address that as well. So this is something you're already pretty well aware of. If you live in Minnesota, you know you spend a lot more on heating than you do in Miami. And this concept here is something called the heating degree days. And what a heating degree day is, it looks at, there's a 65 degree benchmark again, but it looks at what your low was for the day and what your high was for the day. So let's say your low overnight temperature was 45 degrees and your high overnight temperature was 55 degrees. That averages out to 50 degrees. So you take 65 minus 50, you come up with 15 heating degree days. You do that for the whole year. Northern Minnesota above 10,000, Miami below 500. Your area probably is somewhere in between, but even with that, you don't quite have the answer because you want to know how long your furnace is actually running. And to learn your run hours, you take heating degree days times 24 hours in a day divided by 65 minus your outside design temp. Outside design temp is something that whoever designed your house in the beginning, they said, okay, you need this size furnace to stay at a comfortable indoor temperature 99% of the time. So in Minnesota, that could be 25 below zero. In Tuscaloosa, it could be 30 degrees, some other temperature that's much warmer than Minnesota. Anyway, that's a lot of math. Understandably, you may not want to get into all that. So here's a simpler way to do it. If you look at, in this case, this was the electric bill. You'll see that on average, even in June, July, August, there's around 2.5. I'm sorry, this is not an electric bill, but conceptually it would work the same way. You see that this is the gas bill, so there was around 2.5 MCF used even in the summer. Why? Because the hot water heater is a gas hot water heater. So we need to subtract that out if we're going to be just looking at, if we're keeping the gas for heating the hot water, potentially we'd be throwing that out too, then we could look at that. But assuming we're only looking at heating at the moment, this red box shows the MCF that are used for heating, and from that you can convert to BTUs, and from that you can then convert from the analysis we've already done, what you're paying for different options per 10,000 BTUs. Okay, so yeah, you need to know if you're in an area like Miami, what type of heating you get is probably not on your radar of big concerns, right? Because it's not going to be a very expensive proposition. Further north you get, it becomes a bigger decision. And so from that, yeah, you need to look at what your actual runtime is, because those will be big elements and cost justifying one way or the other what decision you're making here. Okay, so we didn't even really look at day one cost. Day one cost is what you're actually paying for the heat pump or paying for the furnace. And to me, it's similar to like if you're getting married and debating or figuring out how much you're spending on the wedding instead of how much that partner is going to cost over the course of 25 years. You want to make sure you're in a good marriage, right? Because your heat pump is probably going to last 15 plus years. And we saw that furnace lasting 50 plus years. So how efficient those are and how well they operate for you going to be a big consideration. The day one cost is about twice as much for a heat pump as it is for a furnace. Same way with the installation, plus or minus. And that's because you're having to really install two parts, right? You have to install the indoor part and the outdoor part such that this transfer can take place. And then connecting them are the refrigerant lines. And so that's another aspect of the install that you don't have when installing a furnace. Maintenance, relatively similar. Neither one should need a lot of maintenance. As long as the heat pump, as long as the refrigerant lines did a nice job in the install. Going to be changing filters more on your heat pump than your furnace, probably if you're like most people. So a little bit of expense for that, but both shouldn't need a ton of maintenance, but you can do some math on that if you choose. Right now, the good news, but anyway, those top two kind of check marks against the heat pump. A plus in the heat pump department, heat pump column is there are incentives now, this dubiously named Inflation Reduction Act, which probably isn't curing much inflation, but it's manna from heaven in that any Energy Star approved heat pump, and to be Energy Star approved, you need to be above 9.5 HSPF, and for air conditioning, which we didn't talk about, above 16 SEER. But somewhat difficult to meet that threshold, but if you can do that, you get 30% off, 30% investment tax credit. So that's cash off whatever the bottom line of your taxes were. All right. Also, some jurisdictions have local incentives to do heat pumps. All right. Furnaces, there are Inflation Reduction Act money for furnaces, but they need to be 97% efficient. And those suckers are expensive, and for that you get $600. But it still might not be a bad way to go if you are in a very far north area. And then there's also potential bans on furnaces, like New York. I think if somebody's in New York, they might know for sure if this is the case, but I heard that they're looking at banning furnaces by 2025 in any new construction. If you have one already, maybe you can get in under the wire right now too, but if there's bans, that obviously makes it a lot easier to get a heat pump than a furnace. We alluded to a little bit maybe, you don't need to dump your furnace if you get a heat pump. And so there are these dual strategy of having both a furnace and a heat pump. And you can actually buy some of these critters that have, if you're tearing everything out and starting anew, you can buy one that has a heat pump and a furnace all in one duct. Or you can add a heat pump coil to your duct, provided the duct static pressure is not prohibitive to be able to do that, but talk to your installer to see if that will work for you. And then you kind of have the best of both worlds in that you can tap that 30 to 65 degree range, shoulder season if you're in the northern area, or potentially that's your whole winter season if you're in a place like Las Vegas. And that makes heat pumps work out pretty well for either part of the year or the whole heating season. And another plus for a heat pump, let's say that you also need a central air conditioner. Whatever you do, don't buy a new central air conditioner right now, because for basically a few dollars more, literally, in most cases, you can make an air conditioner heat pump. Why? Because all it has is a reversing valve. And so that will run part of the time in the winter, if not the whole time, depending on where you live. And you're getting a free air conditioner. So you say, okay, when you're going through this analysis, you say, oh, it's worth $1,000 or $1,500 off the price of this new heat pump because I'm also getting a new air conditioner. So take that into account as well. Comfort considerations. Most gas furnaces, they don't modulate, so that means that they either surge on or they're off. So I remember being a little kid waiting for that furnace to come on in the winter when it was super cold, and then after it's on for 10 minutes, you're just sweating. When's this thing going to turn off? And so you're going from uncomfortable, you're pretty much most of the time you're a bit uncomfortable, and that's because the furnace didn't modulate, it was on or off. That's how traditionally heat pumps are, on and off, but now there are a lot more that are variable refrigerant flow, variable speed compressor heat pumps, and so they can shadow your set point better, and they run a lot more, but they run using less power, so it ends up A, you're more comfortable, B, those use less power to run. We didn't talk about mini splits yet, but let's say you have only one room, or you either spend a lot of time, or maybe you have a room that isn't getting proper heating or cooling, and you don't want to put another duct into your main furnace, put a mini split in. Mini splits, most are more efficient than standard larger heat pumps. And also, if you put this mini split in the room where you spend the most amount of time, home office, etc., you can turn your air conditioner to a warmer setting or heater to a colder setting. And yes, when you leave to go to the john or whatever, yeah, maybe you're going to be uncomfortable for a few seconds or a few minutes, depending on what you're doing in there. But by and large, you're in your one area where you're spending the most amount of time. That can really save a lot of money. So if you want to get your feet wet with a heat pump, look at getting a mini split. I think you'll be pretty happy with the possibilities after researching that. We didn't talk really about solar, and solar is what's going to be the salvation, I think, to people that are going forward here. We're going to be needing more and more electricity, even as it becomes less and less. The grid's becoming less reliable, and it's becoming more expensive. So that doesn't seem fair, right? But the way you can combat this is you can get solar. And if you have a variable refrigerant flow heat pump, variable speed heat pump, that's pretty easy to run on not a whole heck of a lot of solar. Solar in 2010 was wholesale price of $2 per watt. By 2025, as in a couple of years from now, it's forecast to be 10 cents per watt. And there's around 1,500 watts needed per ton of heating or air conditioning. And so for a 60,000 BTU furnace, now granted in the winter there's not as much sun either, especially if you're in the north. But what's also coming online now is storage. So you're gonna be able to store some of this solar as well. Anyway, it's going to help you to have a bit more control to run hybrid in line, in tandem with the grid if you can get some of your power from solar. So be open-minded to it, even if you haven't considered it in the past, because it's coming. And you know, your circumstances are going to vary. I'd like to hear some of your stories of how you're making a decision. Probably there are factors that are totally unrelated to what we're discussed so far, but those need to be put into the weighting here. If you're in Massachusetts, say, you might say, oh, for sure we need the new furnace, but let's say that you're in Florida in December, January, and February. Maybe you could live with just a heat pump, or at least get a heat pump, and it will be cost justified. Maybe solar doesn't work for you because you live in the woods. Maybe different factors, but consider all these aspects, and then you're going to put those into what we call a net present value. And so the day one cost, along with different factors that are important to you, can be plus or minus the cost of the heat pump or the furnace. But then you're also going to be looking at these cash flows for the next 15, 20, 25 years of what it would cost to run either a furnace or heat pump. And you know, if you want to get into Excel and actually do a discounted cash flow, that's relatively easy to do in Excel, but you can look at what the real cost is for running that heat pump and how versus furnace, and how that plays out compared to your day one considerations. And you're going to be, if you go through all that, if you choose to go through any of this, you're going to be in line to hopefully be making a better decision. If you want to even go with your gut, hopefully you got some insight from this analysis. Concepts to take away: heat pumps, there are efficiencies above 30, 35, 40 degrees. 30 to 60 degrees, that's heat pumps wheelhouse. They're super efficient, and not much can be run for less per 10,000, cost per 10,000 BTUs than a heat pump in those scenarios. So keep that in mind to potentially incorporate a heat pump into your repertoire. And yes, subscribe. We do actually solar powered heat pumps. So if that is any interest to you, subscribe to our Air Spool channel here. Appreciate your time. Thank you.